I'm Dr. Duke, together again with Matt Shea, State Representative from Washington. And Matt, so you've done a lot of work, not only pulling apart the crazy logic and rationale for the United Nations, but you've also highlighted one key aspect of the dysfunctionality of the UN, and that is the role that radical Islamists and radical Islamist ideology plays in the day-to-day operation and governance of the UN. Talk a little bit about radical Islam in the UN.
So the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is tied very closely to Turkey and Recep Erdogan, Turkey's leader, is very closely tied also to the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood in the Holy Land Foundation trial in the mid-2000s, it was revealed because the FBI had raided the secret sub-basement of one of their members. It was revealed their plans in the United States of America. And so any adjunct of the Muslim Brotherhood is following along with these plans is a direct existential threat to the United States of America. And I want to be really clear because they laid it out in their own words what their plan was. And this was introduced as evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial. And this was the strategy that they were going to use in America. Quote, the process is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers. So the whole point behind this was a civilization jihadist process. So this idea that the immigration coming into this country is somehow just innocuous and we don't need to worry about it really isn't true based on their own words. In addition to that, what was also found in that secret sub-basement was called the World Underground Movement Plan. And this plan was broken up into particularly 5 phases. The very first phase, and there's a couple interesting quotes out of this that I think are very important, but the first phase was, they said, already implemented in this country. So this is back in 2004 timeframe. And it says this, the first phase is the discrete and secret establishment of elite leadership. Okay, this comes from their plan. Phase 2 was then to, quote, infiltrate various sectors of government, end quote, and then to, quote, establish a shadow government within the government, end quote. Can somebody say deep state? It's right there in the Muslim Brotherhood plan. You go to phase 3 and 4 and it gets a little bit more interesting. Prior to this is their words, prior to any conflict or confrontation, they would utilize mass media to try to discredit their detractors. And that is exactly what we're trying to see right now, or what we're seeing right now, and what we're trying to defend against right now. Phase 4, they said that there would be open public confrontation with the government through the exercising of what's called the political pressure approach. Can anybody say the squad? Now remember, this is 2004. They're just following their plan. But at the same time in phase 4, they said they would begin training in the use of weapons domestically in anticipation of, quote, 0 hour, end quote. That is a military term to say that eventually they would try to do some sort of an armed conflict here in the United States of America, and not just here in the United States of America, but also other countries in the world. And I want to just go through a couple of those right now that are happening. This just happened this last week, and a lot of people probably don't know that this has occurred. But there was a vehicle ramming attack that happened in Limburg, Germany, where a lorry was hijacked. It was driven into cars and pedestrians. 14 people were injured, and I think a couple were killed. There were 2 people killed in a shooting outside of a synagogue in eastern Germany, in the city of Halle, that just happened, I think, today. And in that video, it was very clearly related to anti-Semitism, but this rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing, not just in Europe and in the United States of America, stems from these Islamists. And so the United Nations, tied to an organization that fully wants to see this World Underground Movement plan implemented, fully wants to use jihadist civilization jihad and jihadist processes here in the United States of America, clearly we shouldn't be a part of an organization that is defending that, countenancing that, or putting these folks on committees and agencies and allowing non-governmental organizations affiliated with these individuals and countries to drive policy and also to drive the train as far as the direction of the United Nations. It would be dumb of us as the United States to continue in such an organization.
I think you make a really great point about countries like Germany and Sweden, to mention a few. It's interesting, isn't it, that you've had this radical influx of unassimilated and defiant refugees, most of them from Islamic countries, and the violence that's taking place, the rapes that are going on in Sweden almost on a daily basis, the brutality, the bullying, and the rape that takes place in Germany, that the fact that the Swedish and German government cover up those statistics. They don't want you to know what's happening. And when they do talk about those horrific crimes committed in the name of Allah, they always never mention the detail of Islamist behavior, right? It's never specified. And to me, that signifies that much of the governments of Europe, Western Europe, have already bought into a globalist plan. They don't want to report this because the globalist push that the Islamic movement is helping to facilitate, a sort of a secular caliphate, I suppose they think, is bigger than the protection of their own people.
Really, they're allowing this chaos to be created so that it can justify more bureaucracy and more controls and more regulations, etc. And the fact of the matter is that it is a complete and utter myth that there are so-called lone wolf attacks. We see and hear that in the media all the time. That is a total and utter bogus myth. There is no such thing. What it is fourth-generation warfare. The internet is being used to radicalize these individuals. They're being given, especially in some of the documents written by Saeed Qutb and other people, how to radicalize other people, how to become militarized, how to train, and then they go and they implement this. This is not some sort of a one-off in all these different corners of the world. This is a very clear, coordinated plan. It is very clearly fourth-generation warfare, which is primarily about non-state actors operating in small cells individually using improvised techniques and tactics to foment terror around the world and chaos around the world. And the globalists are allowing that to happen, to use it to justify more controls. In Europe, quite frankly, the folks that I've talked to, I just got back from Ukraine, they're sick and tired of it, and they're beginning to fight back and say, no, this is not going to happen. Our country does matter. Our culture does matter. Our heritage and traditions do matter. We are going to defend them, and we are going to defend Christendom. They're very clear about that, too, that their Christian belief system is worth fighting for and defending. And that's what's obviously being attacked right now across Europe and also in the United States of America.
We have about 2.5 minutes left. I wanted to ask you, I know that you had said clearly that one of the tactics going back to 2004 and beyond is to use the media to smear anybody who would stand up to them. Because of your wonderful research on what exactly is happening with radical Islamists, you're being smeared. Talk a little bit. Give me about a minute and a half of your view on how they're attacking you and how this fits the program.
Well, it's interesting. In the former Soviet Union, when you talk to Christians who were persecuted there, the Soviets would say, you have religious freedom. But then they would use Bible verses and turn them into something nefarious. So for an example that I can give you personally, I did a Bible study on Deuteronomy 20, which is warfare in the Old Testament. It was in a folder with other documents that included just war theory, Colonel Glover John's observations on war, the U.S. military code of conduct, etc. Well, the military took the military gives training like this and doesn't take one document, but takes the whole history. And so as a former Army guy, I had this, and the media took one document, didn't talk about the other documents, and tried to say, oh, yes, you are advocating biblical warfare. Do you believe what's in the Old Testament? And I said, listen, it doesn't matter what I believe. That's what it says in the original Hebrew. Go take a look at the notes and see how accurate it is. But this was a technique they actually used in the former Soviet Union to take something that was just usually a normal Christian doctrine and then turn it into something nefarious to justify the persecution of Christians. Another one that we're seeing today is so-called Christian supremacy or dominionism. Look at Christ, was crucified, died, was buried, and resurrected. He paid the price for the dominion of this earth. And that's what we believe as Christians. We're not going to shy away from that. But they're trying to turn that into something nefarious. So those are just a couple examples, and they're following, again, a Soviet tactic that we've seen before.
Yeah, in The Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's great play, he wrote, the devil can cite scripture for his purposes, that if you do what you just said, you can cherry pick the Bible, you could ignore context, you could ignore documents. In your case, the entire military training, they picked one document to signal out on and try to call you out as some kind of Old Testament wackadoodle. I call it the Handmaid's Tale, right? The Handmaid's Tale, the series, we have never had a Christianity that behaved that way. but they're arguing in those feminist tomes that we're going to return to that, something we never had to begin with. You see the deception there. We've got about 25 seconds left. Give us your last thoughts on what can be done to raise awareness to this issue.
Well, what can be done is understand what the threats are. Go to the JBS website. Go to some of these presentations. Well, I'm traveling all over the country giving these presentations because it's important that we don't just understand the threat, but what to do about it. And what to do about it is get involved with the New American, especially the New American magazine, the premier intelligence digest in America, and remember history.
State Rep Matt Shea from Washington, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Steve.